So let's get started. We have a great panel today, and the panel will be moderated by Stacy Dalton, who is a 2020 grad of the Masters in Liberal Arts program. Not really sure what's going on there. And 2020 grad in the Masters in Liberal Arts program, and also my colleague here at Duke Alumni Affairs and Development. So I will turn it over to Stacy.
Hi, everybody. To get us kicked off, I would like to ask each of the panelists to give us a 30-second introduction of yourself as it relates to this particular program, as in what you do, what your transition is, and to get us kicked off. If you'll get us started.
Yeah. Hey, everyone. I'm Gary A. I run the Instagram account called Art Drunk, which has turned into more of a media platform to promote contemporary art internationally. So I studied art history and economics at Duke, graduated in 2017. Originally was down the investment banking consulting path. Actually ended up working in fintech, and then over the course of a couple of years decided to change paths and start my own company.
Thanks, Gary. We're glad to have you. Thamina?
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for having me, Stacy. My name is Thamina Stoll. I graduated from Duke in 2017, where I majored in political science and did certificates in policy journalism and media studies and innovation entrepreneurship. After graduating from Duke, I actually stayed at Duke for a one-year-long digital communication and marketing fellowship at the Sanford School of Public Policy, which was great. And then in October of 2018, I started my professional journey at LinkedIn in Dublin, Ireland, where I have been ever since. Got promoted twice within under 2 years. And I also founded FemHive, and I'm the host of the FemHive podcast to support young female professionals to feel less overwhelmed within the first couple of years of their young professional life.
Thanks for being with us. Rachel?
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Karasik. I got a master's in environmental management at Duke in 2016. Before that, I was working in environmental education, and since then I've been working in policy research. So I can talk a little bit about the grad school process as well. And I focus a lot on marine and coastal policy issues at the Nicholas Institute for Environmental Policy Solutions at Duke. So I'm still very local.
Fantastic. Eden?
Hi, everyone. I'm Eden Ashubeer. I graduated with Gary and Thamina in 2017. I personally did a sociology major, visual media studies minor, and a marketing management certificate. And currently I'm in DC working as an associate vice president, leading the ads and acquisition fundraising efforts at my company for politicals and nonprofits. That includes presidential to Senate. Most notably, at least last cycle to me, was, if any of you are familiar with the runoff in Georgia, Raphael Warnock was one of my clients, as well as kind of the general Senate. And I went from being a digital associate about 4 years ago, transitioned to a strategist, and then a senior strategist, and then about a year ago became an associate vice president.
Very cool. Thank you. I know that job transitions and moving up the ladder and changing career paths can sometimes be really challenging. And I want to kind of get us kicked off with a lightning round where we're just going to raise our hands. And audience, feel free to join in with the hand raising just for some perspective. But raise your hand if you completely changed your career path from what you planned when you were at Duke. Great. Raise your hand if you rose very quickly in your company. Excellent. Raise your hand if you have ever experienced imposter syndrome. Raise your hand if you were ever confused about your next step in your career. Yeah, just to kind of get us all on the same page before we dive in. Rachel and Gary, I know this first question particularly applies to you. You both pursued careers that were a part of your passion, but within the industry you selected, you had to figure out which roles that you were going to pursue. How did each of you do that? Rachel, you want to get us kicked off?
Sure. So yeah, I knew I cared about the environment. There are a lot of ways to care about the environment and a lot of kind of organizations and companies that one might want to work for. I think it takes a lot of time, and I'm still in the process of figuring out exactly what I want to do, but I would kind of think about two ways to do that. One is to sort of do everything you can to make yourself indispensable in your job. So volunteer for as many things as you can, offer to be as useful as possible. This is like a bad example, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but in my old job, I was like the person who was not afraid to kill cockroaches. Like, I'm not saying be that person, but I think find ways to make yourself stand out, and that'll open the door for new opportunities and new ways to engage with projects or with clients or with research. And that'll give you an idea. And then the other thing is, take advantage of opportunities that are either free because they're provided by Duke or through networking, to like do the sorts of exercises and workshops and focus groups that help you hone in on what you want to do. And I think a lot of those can feel like a waste of time, and a lot of them might be a waste of time, but you might get a glimmer of inspiration. So I recently did like a purpose coaching workshop and didn't get a whole lot out of it, but at the end of it, they asked us to write down, and I would recommend everybody do this as well. They asked us to write down 5 stories of anything in our lives that kind of got us jazzed, got our juices flowing, and to look at those 5 things and think about what they have in common and how that can be applied to finding purpose in your job. And I thought that was really, really helpful. So
it sounds like you really took advantage of all of your opportunities and were willing to do literally anything for your company, which is charming. And Gary, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, initially when I started working in the art world, when I graduated Duke, I really didn't want to work in the art world, because the careers I was exposed to are really just, become a curator, which involves getting a master's, getting a PhD, or working as a gallery assistant, which is usually, the people you see at the front desk of gallery.
It's like a career thing that I was gonna just listen to from 8, 7 to 8.
Just a reminder, have everybody mute if you're not a speaker. Sorry, Gary.
All good. And then, so those are the 2 paths I was sort of exposed to, and it was really over time spending, when I was still working in fintech, spending time at galleries, spending time with people in the industry, where I realized, oh, there's actually a lot more roles. There's journalists, there's finance people at galleries, there's operations roles, there's all these, especially nowadays in the digitalization, I guess, of the art industry. There's a lot of new roles that are coming up where I was only learning about just by kind of being around the scene per se. So I think for me, it was really just spending time in New York, where a lot of the galleries are based. And then over time realizing, there's a lot of opportunities where I've always wanted to start my own company, always wanted to enter the art space in some way, maybe not a traditional way. And those kind of conversion to starting my own company, starting a media platform that I thought could be different from what I was already seeing in the art world. So it was more finding a gap, and then kind of now trying to fill that gap with creating my own role, kind of, per se.
That's a really unique way of looking at that. I love that you explored your opportunity sort of from within and, finding it out that way. Eden, I know that you mentioned in your prep call that one day that you discovered that everybody thought you had been promoted higher and then you weren't, and you had to advocate for yourself. Talk us through how you navigated that process.
Yeah. So just to, I kind of have to go back a little bit there. So this was, I was about 1.5 years of my time at my company. As a reminder, I've been there now 4 years. And I was still an associate at 1.5 years. I was actually ready. It was like right after, winter holidays. I was like, I'm coming back. I'm going to negotiate and push to get a promotion. And then there was actually some restructuring happening with our management. And my new manager actually asked me, so how long have you been a strategist? I was like, I'm not, I'm an associate. And she's like, asked again, and I gave her the same answer. I'm still an associate. And after talking a little bit, she actually revealed that not only did she not realize, but a lot of other higher ups, and even some people not that much higher up than me, or even our president actually had no idea that I was still an associate. So she actually told me that at that time, she was actually getting ready to suggest me for a promotion to senior. I mean, that for those of you who are maybe wondering how I got to like AVP so quickly, that might kind of give you a glimpse into how qualified they thought I was like earlier on. But that was obviously very problematic. And so from that point on, I really realized I need to advocate for myself. I really need to make clear exactly how I feel about where I am, and also just make myself generally stand out. While I think I was doing good work, I don't think I was doing basically what Rachel said, forcing myself to kind of stand out. And so from then on, I really changed everything that I was doing. I mean, I now, everything I do, or like just throughout the year, I'll screenshot compliments, or I'll make a list of all the things that I've done, all the projects or the big accomplishments I've made. And then I was able to, for both my senior strategist and AVP strategist promotions, kind of bring, not directly like say, oh, here's a screenshot of when I got a compliment, but kind of reference those and say, here are my strong points. Here are how they fit into what you're looking for specifically in this role, slash, you know, just I fit the overall goals of the company. And so actually about 6 months after that conversation where I finally became a strategist, I was able to push into being a senior strategist. So that was a pretty quick transition, but I really credit it to, like I said, keeping track of things, and really having kind of what I call my 3 main bullets, my 3 main things that I can kind of come back to and say, hey, here's where my value is.
That's a really great point, because truly anybody can use those tools and that advice to help advance themselves, regardless of career path or anything they're doing. Thamina, would you be willing to talk about the practical things that you did to raise your profile and quantify your impact and market value at your company?
Sure, more than happy to. So just like for context, so in terms of the timeline, so I joined LinkedIn in October of 2018 as part of their business leadership program for recent college graduates that lasted for about 6 months. And then in May of 2019, I transitioned into sales development, got promoted in January of 2020 to senior sales development representative. And then the following August, so about 6 months later, got promoted to account director within our LinkedIn Marketing Solutions business line, where I support companies, including Fortune 500 companies, achieve their marketing objectives on the platform. So 2 promotions in under 2 years, and also like a 60% salary increase. So this is how I did it. So really, if you want to get promoted or climb up the corporate ladder, you really need to start building your personal brand internally. So what I did in the beginning was I focused really on nailing my core role. And what really helped me with that was being open to constructive feedback, and also action that feedback that I was given by more senior people fast, so I could prove to them and other internal stakeholders that I can learn fast and that I have a growth mindset. And that really allowed me to establish trust. And once I had established that trust, I just kept showing up over and over again to maintain those relationships. So these internal stakeholders would then become mentors and sponsors down the road, who would be willing to go the extra mile to speak up on my behalf, especially when I wasn't in the room. And this becomes particularly important when you're up for another promotion or you want to transfer internally. So in my previous sales development role at LinkedIn, I worked really hard in the beginning to overachieve all of my targets, to establish trust. And as a result, I was quickly known as the best sales development rep on the floor in terms of results. And then once I had actually nailed my core, I started being involved in many projects outside of my core role. The biggest one being the company's youngest women at LinkedIn, obviously globally, which then allowed me to get more exposure to more senior leaders and expand my network internally. I won multiple like regional awards, like Rockstar Award, Results Award, Leadership Award, MVP Award in my organization of around 160 reps. And obviously people do talk, you know, there is especially like gossiping going on in companies. So eventually hiring managers also knew who I was. So instead of me having to approach them, they approached me trying to figure out what team I wanted to join next and if I was potentially interested in joining their teams. So for my current account director role, for example, they were looking for someone with 6+ years of sales or account management experience. I had 1 year of experience at that point, and yet the hiring manager proactively approached me when the headcount opened up, asking if I wanted to apply to this role. In the end, I got the job, and technically I also skipped one level. And going back to what Eden was just mentioning, I think this is so important, and I cannot stress this enough. On top of excelling in your role, you also have to make sure that you track your progress and the impact you're having along the way, because contrary to popular belief, your managers do not know what you're up to on a daily basis, especially when they have multiple people report into them. Accomplishments unfortunately do not speak for themselves. So you have to let them know. And I always suggest, similar to what Eden said, to keep a working doc where you just brain dump all your achievements, leadership shout outs, testimonials from customers, quotes, compliments, any data that really supports your cause. And then a few weeks before your next performance review, you turn that into a cohesive document that you can then share with your manager. If possible, I always suggest that you align that with your company's core values or any sort of evaluation pillars that you have. So for LinkedIn, those 3 evaluation pillars that we use are called leadership, leverage, and results. So I don't know if that's something that you have, but you might want to reach out to your manager or your HR department if you don't, if you're not familiar with those evaluation pillars. And then a pro tip that I'm still trying to figure this out myself, but something that I've heard has worked really well for other people, and I started doing that recently, is to obviously keep track of all your accomplishments and try to like quantify your impact whenever you can, but then turn that into a quick email and send that email to your manager every week or every other week with all of those achievements, so they actually know how great you are. Because this then also allows you to prime your manager months ahead of your next performance review or promotion conversations. And brownie points for anyone who can focus on things that also make your manager look good in front of their manager. That's really one of the most important career advice that I've been given, to always make your manager look great. So for example, at the beginning of one quarter, I told my manager that I really wanted to win that leadership award for the entire EMEA and LATAM region. So my manager was really thrilled, because obviously it would be a great reflection on herself as well if one of her teammates won that award. So we worked together to make it happen, and it did happen in the end.
That's fantastic. What I'm really hearing you say is, you know, prepare for these opportunities with all this great data and information before it's even happened to you, and really get people in your corner effectively. Rachel, I would love to hear from both you and Eden on how you weigh in on the role of foresight when you're preparing for a transition or your next move or those kinds of things.
Sure. I can go first. So I'm in a field where the sort of next steps in your career are not as clear or defined as they might be in certain industries. And I'm in a field that can be very, very competitive, while also very, very underpaid. So that's fun. But so I am really talking to people who are in similar fields where the next steps are not as clear. I think this requires an incredible amount of foresight, and I can't say that I've applied it necessarily in the past, but I hope to in the future. You know, when you're in a really competitive field and you're thinking to yourself, you know, I think I'll be ready for something new in 6 months and in a year, like, you start looking now, because it can take a really, really long time to get a job. And sometimes it can be right away, and you can be like, oh, shucks, I wish I stayed for a little bit longer. But I think something happens to some people, including myself and maybe others here, that when you start looking for a new job, you become desperate, and you don't want to feel like you're desperate or unhappy in your role or stifled. And so, you know, for people where that path is not quite as clear, like I would think about, you know, looking a year ahead and saying, do I still want to be in that place? And if the answer is no, like starting, getting on your Duke alumni website now and starting to make those calls.
What about you, Eden?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the biggest thing that I like to say on this point is if wherever you start now is really going to determine where you're at later. So that sounds very obvious, but what I'm trying to get across here is that, so I guess I can take the example of myself, right? So when I started at my company, I was an associate, obviously, like I said, but by the next promotion and negotiation for my salary, I was already thinking about some of the actually other people that I'd heard about in my company. And I heard other people are at different actually pay points and stuff like that. And I realized that some of them hadn't negotiated. They hadn't negotiated at all. But I was already ahead because I actually had negotiated my initial pay. And then I realized a lot of people, and I should say, Thamina was one of my friends that helped me kind of think through all that. But what that made me realize is if I don't negotiate, they're not going to push, right? It makes sense from a business standpoint. But by the end, I was able to, one, get to AVP within about 3 years' time and double my pay, because I kept saying to myself, if I don't negotiate this much more now, then I'm going to have to do that next time. So
Right.
if I had just kind of accepted the initial numbers they gave me, that would mean, for the next job and the next job after, I would have to be working hard to get to a higher number or a higher position. So basically my thing is be aggressive now, because if you, especially, while we're all younger, we have all this energy and all that, we should really take advantage of that and push really hard now, not just in how you're actually working, but actually show your value to the point where they can't refuse you a promotion or a pay raise. Both at the same time, at least. And that, by the way, that is one thing. Do not, you better get a pay raise with your promotion, or you need to push for that. Yeah, it's really just think, where do I want to be in 10 years? Just like a vague idea. Is pushing by a couple, like a small amounts, going to work, or should you just go forward? And I think one piece of advice one of my friends gave me, that's I've kept very close to my heart, is if it doesn't make you uncomfortable, you're not asking for enough. That's obviously very specific to salary, but I think even just like I said, in the fact that I honestly had the audacity to push for AVP when I did, I think that kind of shows in that place too. So think well ahead, think big picture, and it's not about knowing exactly what you're going to be doing next. It's not that at all. It's just thinking about, I guess one way to put it is, by the time you retire, where do you want to be, and are you going to be able to get there sooner rather than later?
Well, and you make an excellent point. I mean, if you don't ask for it, you're definitely not going to get it, right? And there is some industry specific variances. You ask for different things based on the industry you're in, but knowing your industry is really helpful in that. Gary, can you talk us through when you realized you had to make a shift and how you had foresight and proceeded to put that into action?
Yeah, so a little bit more background on what I used to do. I worked at a fintech company. It was like Fortune 500, so not like a sexy startup. But I worked on an executive team where my official title is business analyst, but really functionally I was more of the chief of staff to one of the executives. And that was an incredible opportunity, especially at that time when they were merging business divisions. And so I had a lot of experience to see how these executives thought about running a business, and thought about, all the numbers to running a business, managing teams, all those sorts of things. At the same time, I was still very slowly, passively kind of growing Art Drunk, which was my media company now. And it was purely just on Instagram at the time. I think it was maybe 40, 50,000 followers. Now it's just over 100,000. But at the time, it was just something I thought was a hobby. But back in March of 2019 was when there's an opportunity for Art Drunk to travel to Amsterdam, Dubai, Hong Kong, and around Asia, all in the same month, to cover art. And that's exactly what I loved and wanted to do. And so to me, there wasn't really an option. It was either take that opportunity or unfortunately pass on it, and who knows what would happen. But I think I was very lucky in that I already had some business experience working in these other industries. And now, I look back on it every day of, man, I really learned a lot from these people, these executives that I worked for. Sometimes I actually still think I wish I'd stayed even a few months longer, or 6 months to a year longer, because they have decades of experience under their belt that I can learn from. Whereas now it's kind of just learning as I go, which has its own challenges. But again, I think at that time it was more the amount of opportunities that came in. It was hard to pass on that.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And following that path and like making a move and sometimes struggling with that can be challenging sometimes. Rachel, I'd love for you to chat. You mentioned some of this in the prep call about the role of reflection and preparing for things, especially like networking calls and these things that get you ready.
Yeah, I have lots and lots of thoughts about networking calls. So I'll try to make it succinct, but I think the first thing is for folks who are like me, and I think most folks are like this, networking is really scary and it makes you really vulnerable. And, even though like the Duke network is the best, sometimes people don't answer and that feels bad. So I think the first thing is like, treat yourself with kindness and compassion, and cry to your friends and cry to your family. And like, that's okay. You don't have to be like the best networker in the world. And I think 99% of the time it's going to land you nowhere. And that's just part of it. You kind of have to go through those 99 to get through the others. And I think in that same vein, that also lets you know who your allies are in the field that you're pursuing. So, if you're reaching out to folks and they're not responding, or they're being curt, or they're ghosting you, even though that could have been your dream job or your dream company, like you don't want to work there. That's not a culture that you're interested in. And so you can take those rejections or even those networking calls that don't lead you anywhere and use them to kind of make a map of like where you want to be and where you don't want to be, and what kind of person you want to be when you're in the position where you're being approached. And I think the last thing, and this is really hard to do, again, and it goes back to feeling vulnerable and putting yourself out there, is like you want to have an ask on every single networking call, whether that's asking somebody to connect you with somebody else, or like really pressing them to keep you in back of mind for opportunities and stuff like that. And I think that is the hardest part, to not just be like, I want to know about you and I want to tell you about me and thank you and goodbye. But before you meet with that person, look them up, think about what you need. I think what I've talked about before, like as you're trying to figure out your purpose and your passion, try to integrate that into those conversations and come out with an ask. And sometimes that ask won't be met, and it's all just very uncomfortable. And I think being patient and kind is necessary.
Several of you raised your hands, when we said imposter syndrome, and, a lot of these feelings play into, it can be really hard networking or making these asks for growth. And Thamina, I know this is your area of expertise. What are some of the things that women in particular need to keep in mind as they're navigating self-promotion and networking and these asks?
Yeah, Stacy, as you know, I'm so passionate about this topic because this is a lot of work that I'm focusing on with the FemLife podcast and my coaching business. But just to set the stage, so unfortunately, we still live in a world where it is socially frowned upon when women promote themselves, because the character traits that are associated with self-promotion are historically associated with stereotypically male traits, but not with female traits. And as a result, women are being punished when they're not gender role congruent. So this obviously also affects men as well. Gender stereotypes just suck in general, but therefore it is just more difficult for women to promote themselves because we always want to be liked and not come across as too assertive. So we oftentimes associate our professional success with externalities. Like, how often have you heard a badass woman hide her badassness behind statements like, oh, but I had a lot of help, or I just got very lucky. The timing was right. Sound familiar? Have you
Very.
ever heard a man say anything like that? And as I was saying earlier, unfortunately, achievements do not speak for themselves. And if we women don't start speaking up and advocating for ourselves, we do risk falling behind our self-promoting male peers. And I get it, it's super difficult, especially for women. I've been there, you know, I grew up in Germany and in a country where self-promotion is frowned upon in general, and then also like add being a woman on top of that. So when I moved to the US, it felt very uncomfortable and unnatural to talk about my achievements, but there everything seemed like a competition, especially in an environment like Duke. So if I wanted to keep up with the Americans, I had to learn how to self-promote. And today I feel very comfortable talking about my accomplishments, and I coach young female professionals on that. But it does take time. This doesn't happen overnight. I think starting out by talking to your friends and family about it, practicing with them, always think about, you know, what would you want your best friend to highlight, you know, like even I, as like former roommates, we do that a lot. Like we push each other, you know, like if I'm being too self-critical, she will tell me, Thamina, shut up, like you're amazing, and vice versa. So that's been really helpful for me. And then overall, I think over time, I just really stopped caring about whether people dislike me for my self-promotion, because guess what? Not every person on this planet is gonna like you. That's just a fact. And being liked is not what will get you to a C-level or boardroom seat, but getting shit done and being confident while doing so well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And you have this amazing confidence and this great, you're a great speaker and all of these things. And everybody on this panel is obviously a great speaker, but some people struggle more with these social interactions. And Gary, you mentioned in our pre-call that you were able to successfully build your network and do some of these, navigating some of these areas while being a bit of an introvert. Can you tell us a little bit about that struggle and how you overcame that?
Yeah, kind of a quick plug actually related to Thamina, and you know my question now is next week I'll be on a panel for the Duke Asian Alumni Alliance Symposium, and one of the topics is specifically around navigating the Asian American identity. Fantastic. Which I do think is actually one of the big reasons why I'm more introverted in my business and just more introverted in general. But I guess to your question, there's been a lot that's been said over the course of tonight, such as establishing trust with people, having asks when you're meeting people, trying not to look desperate. Like all of these things really play into how I network, where it's still something I'm trying to navigate and trying to learn, but the way I've always approached it is almost kind of blending, for better or for worse, work and life, where most of the people I'm meeting, it's one-on-one interactions where I become close with someone. Maybe there's no business reason to be close to them immediately, but it's really about, I'm in the fortunate position where I can, I work for myself. I can hire who I want to hire. I can, get clients that I enjoy working with. And so it really is about, meeting people that I think is just, I want to be around. And I think through that, it becomes very natural of, we get along, and they introduce me in, very small group settings with their friends and their potential clients for me. And so that's how I very slowly built my network. I think another aspect that's given me comfort is all of us here, or at least on this panel, are very young, relatively speaking, in terms of the length of our careers. And what my dad especially always tells me is like, this is a very long journey. I don't need to meet every single person in the industry this year. If I'm really in it for the long haul, I'll be here for 30, 40, 50 years.
Great point.
And so even in the past couple of years where I had, I think there was initial pressure to try to meet everyone right away. But then those relationships feel a lot more superficial and actually a lot less beneficial. And so for me, it's been taking a step back, just meeting people as organically as possible. If we get along, great. If we don't, that's okay. There's enough people in the industry where I can still make things happen.
I love that idea, the idea of meeting people, and you're not like, I'm networking today, but you're like, I'm just going to meet people and create relationships. And then the networking sort of naturally happens without it being a formal process.
Exactly.
So I really appreciate you guys all answering our formal questions. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the audience for any of the questions that you may have. Feel free to add any additional questions in the chat, and we'll turn it over to the audience for questions. Susan, would you like to present our first question?
So we do not have any. I think everyone was, oh, here we got one. Good. I felt like everyone was so interested and couldn't stop to think about their questions, but we do have one. So Ryan, do you want to share your question if you're comfortable coming off, turning yourself on?
Sure, I'll just make it easiest. I've got a huge headset on. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so just my main question was on relocating and work authorization. So maybe this is a question for Thamina, but just some tips on what companies do that well and anyone's personal experiences with that. Thank you.
Sure, I can take that, although I'm not sure how helpful I actually be, Ryan, because I don't know where you want to relocate to, but I had the opposite problem where I wanted to stay in the States, but because of tough US immigration, I had to leave and go back to Europe. And I'm a German citizen, so therefore I have work authorization in the entire European Union and most other European countries. So for me, that was not an issue, but I do know that there's a lot of Americans who work at LinkedIn in Dublin, at LinkedIn in London, and at a lot of other tech companies, across Ireland and the UK. Also, a lot of people in Berlin and Amsterdam, actually. So I have more insight into the tech world. So I don't know what your background is, but if you want to ask some questions, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn afterwards as well. I can give you my insights there. But do know that specifically in those locations that I just mentioned, they're hiring so many new people there just because the EMEA region in general, from a business point of view, specifically for American tech companies or American companies in general, I think this region is just growing so much. So I would make sure that you start building those relationships early on. Not every company will be able to sponsor you. Again, depends also on your background. If you have a more technical background, then it's going to be easier. If you speak a second European language fluently, that will also make it a lot easier. I am currently in the process of trying to relocate to Singapore. So if anyone has any connections there, would be really grateful, because I will be facing similar challenges. But I think relationship building can go a long way. And then unfortunately, there are some like regulations and logistics that can make it more challenging. But if you can really also advocate on your own behalf and showcase the impact that you have had, I think that will be really helpful. I don't know if anyone else has some additional thoughts. Gary, maybe.
Yeah, this is actually something I'm kind of going through now, where South Korea is one of the fastest growing art markets. And so I've been spending a ton of time there. I actually just came back to the US, but I was in Korea for the past 7 months, just on a tourist visa. Usually it's, 90-day entry for that type of visa. I was fortunate enough where, because of COVID, I could extend a few times. But, the visas I've started looking at are, I don't have a girlfriend or anything, but marriage visa is like one option if I want to stay longer, or getting a work visa. But obviously, since I run my own company, it's hard to, find a company to hire me. But I found one option where they have an entrepreneurship or self-employment visa, where you actually just have to be very early stages of starting your own company, but you just have to prove that that's what you're trying to do in that country. That could be a foot in the door if you just want to get to a country first, and then that way it's easier to connect with people to find an actual company to hire you potentially. But in general, I think, I've always been interested in working abroad. And so I welcome that conversation too, Thamina, if you have any tips for me. But yeah, I think there's definitely I never heard of this Inner Stride resource, so I think that's curious to look into.
Yeah, it is new. I think the Career Center just purchased it about a year ago, and then they're offering it to alumni. And if you cannot access, send me an email and I will help you figure it out.
I got a question sent directly to me, and I'm going to read it out to the whole panel, and feel free to answer it. Right when I was up for a promotion, a few other women started to damage my image. Being liked seems to be important in my company culture. Should I still try to improve my image, and how do I do this? Or should I just try to move to another company? That's a really hard one.
I know Thamina has something to say on this. But I'll just say, for me, if people are holding you back, that's not the place to be. I don't know who you are, so I don't know at what stage you're in your career, but especially if you're just starting out, if you're not able to thrive, if you're not learning, if you're not giving the space to exist freely, and then I would not stay at the company, quite, if I'm being quite honest. I think you have to make sure that you're in a place that supports you, or else, like kind of like what I was saying a bit ago, right? If you think about how you're going to move ahead faster, staying in an environment like that is going to hold you back longer. So you'd rather, it shouldn't be your job to have to convince people to, like, especially coworkers.
Yeah, totally agree. And maybe something else to add. I don't know where you are in your career and like how young or old you are, but for me, especially the first couple of years post-graduation, like I was suffering from post-graduation depression, like from real depression for about 2 to 3 years after graduating from Duke, because I felt super like overwhelmed, anxious, and lost, because I realized as great and amazing my Duke experience was, it didn't teach me a lot of the things that I needed in order to be a functioning adult on a daily basis. That's why I started my side business, to help young women with that. But what I've learned from my own personal experience with depression is that, especially the first couple of years out of college, you need to prioritize your mental health. It's so important. And if you are exposing yourself to an environment that is just toxic like that, I'm sorry, like you gotta leave. Even if this is your dream role and this is an amazing company, it's not sustainable in the long run, and will only hurt you both from a professional point of view and from a mental health point of view.
Excellent. Any more questions? I'm going to ask our panelists to give us one quick lightning round of last minute advice for the way forward. I'll start with you, Rachel. Sorry. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
Oh no.
You're great at
I
this.
feel like I just gave all my wisdom. I think, yeah, communication is key. And if you can find somebody who you work with, where you feel like you can be open and honest with them and it's safe for you. And if you can't find somebody that in your workspace where you can do that, reconsider or find somebody outside of your workspace. But I have 3 supervisors and they are wildly different, and I know who to go to when I need to talk about some more serious stuff, and I think that's really valuable.
What about you, Eden? Am I killing you guys?
If Gary or Thamina want to go for me, I will not stop them. I need a second because I feel the same as Rachel.
I can jump in real quick. I think it's a lot easier said than done, but people say it all the time, where just follow your passion or follow your gut. I think we're lucky here that we all seem to very much enjoy what we do. I think for me though, I'm actually curious, Thamina and Eden, if you feel the same way, but a lot of my peers who graduated in the same class, people who went down the traditional, quote unquote, traditional paths of like banking and consulting, usually, the idea is you stay for 2 years and then you can do something else. But surprised a lot of my friends quit within a year to just do something either totally different, or maybe they worked at a big bank and decided to stay in finance, but switch to a smaller bank, something like that. And I think that, to me, really says maybe they didn't get weren't able to try all the things that they wanted to try when they were at Duke, feeling that they needed to go down a certain path when maybe their passion was elsewhere. And so any chance you have the opportunity to really explore your passion, whether it's just starting a business on the side, or joining local groups, whatever it may be, just being able to engage with that further. And hopefully that will open up opportunities for you to pursue that more seriously beyond what you're doing today.
That's a great point, Gary.
I 100% agree with you, Gary. And to follow up on what you just said, I think what a lot of us younger folks struggle with is trying to be in alignment and getting closer to our life's purpose. And that's something that I am really struggling with after, like 3-4 years of being out of college, trying to figure that out. And look, I cannot blame the people who go down the traditional path of consulting, finance, especially those people who have student loans to pay off. I was very fortunate in the sense that I landed some scholarships and my family greatly supported me. But to those people who have debt to pay off, like, yes, go after the high paying jobs and like suffer for like 2 to 3 years so you can make a dent in those debt payments. But as I've been thinking so much about this whole idea of finding my life's purpose, I've been reflecting a lot on where I'm at right now and where I want to be. And I figured out for myself that I'm probably not going to stay in the corporate world for the rest of my life. And something that's actually really helped me with that, and this might sound a little bit morbid, but think about if you were to die today or tomorrow, and someone was to write an obituary about you, what would it say? And if I reflect on my professional journey today, it would say something like, Thamina helped companies run ad campaigns on LinkedIn. And while it's obviously a lot like bit superficial and like a lot of strategy goes into that, but that's not what I want to be known for when I pass away. I want to be known for having an impact. So what I figured out for myself is that I want my obituary, whenever my time has come to an end, to sound more like Thamina was a change maker who has impacted the lives of millions of women around the globe. I still have no clue how to get there, no idea. That's what I'm currently trying to figure out, but that's what I want my end goal to be. So now I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are like the bigger milestones that I have to achieve in order to get to that major like life goal of mine, and then reverse backwards to identify smaller milestones along the way, and then take it day by day, week by week, month by month, and hopefully like all these little actions that I'm taking today and the projects that I'm involved in will add up and compound over time to get me to where I want to be eventually. So maybe, I know a bit morbid, but try to write your current obituary and what you want your ideal obituary to look like down the road.
I think it's less about morbidity and really taking a good solid look at what do I really want my life to look like, and I think that's a really thing that we all struggle with and is very universal. Susan? Go ahead.
I can go. So now that I've had so much time to think about it, I think kind of along the lines of actually what Thamina said, when I was applying for jobs after graduating, because I honestly didn't dare apply during school, I remember seeing the job description for this job and seeing the descriptions for other jobs I was looking at. And I remember at that time thinking, I want a job that I can grow and learn in. And so that is actually how I made the decision to go like this. This was not an ideal location. This wasn't where I wanted to be. I didn't really think I'd end up in the political nonprofit space. But right now that's where I'm at, because I look at this company, which was kind of a medium size. When I joined, it was about 70 people. Now it's bigger than that. And so when I thought about that size and what I thought about all of the clients and all the things that I could learn, I saw it was just very clear. I would be able to learn a lot more. I would have to be trusted a lot more. And I would experience a lot more things than I could, quite frankly, in some larger companies, right? There were positions that maybe could have paid a little more at the time, or they would have looked good just from, the company's name. So I know this is not typical advice, but I honestly think if you feel like you're joining a company, at least to start, when you are first, fresh out of college, basically, if you feel like you're joining a company just because of the name, but you don't feel like you are going to get enough information, get enough resources, enough connections to grow further, then I think you need to stop and rethink that. Because honestly, now let me tell you, I know that I am not going to be sticking in politics and nonprofits. It's the politicals that are really doing me in. But I'm not going to do that after this. But I can tell you that everything I've learned here, I will be able to apply to any marketing, at least any digital marketing job, but honestly, just about any sort of marketing job that I want to do. So I feel very confident now versus when I was, fresh out of college. I was like, I don't know what my skills are, whatever. But now I feel like there are so many skills that I've gained, things that like you wouldn't expect from the role I even described to you all. There's so many things I've gotten to touch that are at the highest levels of the company because I have that access and because I trusted that this company would be the type of place where I could do that. So now, like I said, I feel comfortable when I apply to other jobs. I have an angle I feel like I can perfectly explain if I can basically get at what a company wants in a number of ways because I have such a diversity of experience and specifically in-depth experience. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Thank you. That's very well said. And, it really speaks to what everybody has been speaking about today about, following something that really speaks to your inner self and what you're passionate about or your goals for your future and making that happen in a strategic way. I want to give a really big thank you to every single one of you for being on the panel today. It's been great having you here. Thank you so much. And Susan, take us home. You're muted.
Perfect. There. Thank you, Stacy. And thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Stacy, Eden, Rachel, Thamina, and Gary for sharing your experience and inspiring all of us. Just a quick reminder here, sharing a slide just of your Duke resources for networking, for building your network, for having those, what they call like those curiosity conversations where you can just learn from people and explore what your passions are and explore your path. We've got the alumni directory where you actually search for specific people or in specific companies or specific fields. And then Ask a Blue Devil, which is kind of like, it's like spinning a wheel where you kind of post your question or your need to the universe and you see what shows up, which Duke alumni show up in your inbox. And both are great ways to get advice and questions about life, career, a passion project, or just how to get unstuck. Duke alumni are always here for each other. It kind of amazes me how much people are willing to do for each other. So don't sit back if you're feeling stuck and just wait. Just reach out and people will respond. Just a quick reminder again, if you are from the classes of 2020 or 2021, I would really love it if you would just stay on for a few minutes after to have just a quick conversation about this programming that we're thinking of just for our COVID classes. And other than that, have a great evening. And thank you again to our panelists and to Stacy for such an exciting conversation.